80% of German flak gun crews died in World War II. You've seen that statistic before. Maybe in a YouTube video, maybe a Reddit thread, maybe some documentary that promised to explain it and then spent 40 minutes on technical specifications before ending without ever telling you why. Here's what those videos never tell you. The 80% figure cannot be traced to any German military record. No Wehrmacht casualty report, no Luftwaffe personnel file, no post-war academic study. The archives from 1944 and 1945, the years when flak crews would have died in the largest numbers, were destroyed in the same bombing raids those crews were trying to stop. The systematic records simply don't exist. But something worse than a statistic does exist. A documented chronology of how flak duty transformed from a skilled military assignment into a death sentence for children. And the answer to why they died isn't complicated. It's three things. First, desperate demographics. By 1944, the boys manning those guns were 15 and 16 years old, pulled directly from their classrooms. Over 200,000 teenagers conscripted through the Luftwaffenhelfer program, mixed with wounded soldiers transferred from hospitals on the Eastern Front, mixed with 60-year-old men conscripted in the war's final months through the Volkssturm. Second, they were hunted. Not caught in crossfire, hunted. Allied fighter pilots flew specific flak suppression missions with one objective: kill the crews before the crews could kill bombers. P-47 Thunderbolts, Hawker Typhoons, Tempests armed with rockets. The 88mm gun had proven so lethal against tanks and aircraft that every Allied soldier learned the same lesson. The flak crews die first, or your men die instead. Third, they couldn't run. Flak batteries defended cities, fixed positions, concrete emplacements. Berlin was bombed 363 separate times. The crews who survived Tuesday's raid manned the same guns for Wednesday's raid, and Thursday's, and the raid after that. Their orders forbade retreat. Their positions couldn't move. They were anchored to targets that Allied bomber crews had memorized. Teenagers, hunted, trapped. That's the answer other creators tease but never give you. Now let me show you how it happened. The men who crewed Germany's 88mm guns in 1939 and 1940 were professionals, trained Luftwaffe soldiers who understood the complex choreography of air defense. A standard heavy flak battery required between 8 and 11 men working in precise coordination. Loaders handling shells weighing over 20 pounds. Fuse setters calibrating the altitude at which each round would detonate. Rangefinders calculating distance through optical equipment that required steady hands and clear thinking while aircraft engines droned overhead. The sequence could put shells in the air every 3 to 4 seconds. They were good at their jobs. Too good. On May 21, 1940, near the French city of Arras in the Pas-de-Calais region, British tanks of the 4th and 7th Royal Tank Regiments launched a counterattack against advancing German forces. The Matilda tanks proved nearly invulnerable to standard German anti-tank weapons. Their armour shrugged off rounds that should have killed them. Infantry fled. Erwin Rommel, commanding the 7th Panzer Division, personally watched his rear echelon troops panic and scatter. What stopped the British advance was flak crews who lowered their 88mm anti-aircraft guns to horizontal and engaged tanks directly. They destroyed dozens of British vehicles at ranges exceeding 1,000 metres, distances where British tank commanders had believed themselves completely safe from ground fire. The shells that had been designed to detonate in the sky punched through tank armour like it wasn't there. This was a tactical triumph. It was also a death warrant for every flak crew that followed. Unlike purpose-built anti-tank guns designed with low silhouettes and protective shields, the 88mm sat high on its mount. The crews stood exposed on an elevated platform, visible to anyone with binoculars from hundreds of meters away. A rifleman could engage them. A machine gunner could sweep the entire crew in seconds. After Arras, after North Africa, where the 88 again devastated British armour throughout 1941 and 1942, every Allied soldier learned the same tactical imperative. Find the 88. Kill the crew. Do it fast, or your friends burn inside their tanks. Oberfeldwebel Werner Schröder commanded an 88mm battery with the Afrika Korps outside Tobruk in autumn 1941. On November 23rd, during Operation Crusader, his guns engaged British Crusader tanks and destroyed multiple vehicles before British artillery found his position. The first salvo killed 3 of his crew members instantly: the loader, the fuse setter, and a young soldier who had been feeding ammunition from the ready rack. Schröder kept the gun firing with the survivors. Before he was wounded and evacuated to Italy in 1943, he would lose 2 more complete crews to counter battery fire and air attack. The professionals who made the 88 famous were being ground down by enemies who had learned that killing them was worth any cost. And there weren't enough trained soldiers to replace them. The Eastern Front consumed German manpower at a rate no industrial nation could sustain. By early 1943, the Wehrmacht had suffered over 1 million casualties in the Soviet Union, dead, wounded, captured, missing in the snow. Every trained soldier who could hold a rifle was needed to fill divisions that existed only on paper, units whose rosters showed full strength but whose actual ranks held perhaps 1/3 of their authorized numbers. So in February 1943, the Reich made a decision that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. They drafted children. The Luftwaffenhelfer program pulled boys born in 1926 and 1927, 15 and 16 years old, directly from their school desks. The mechanics of conscription were bureaucratic and efficient. A boy attended class on Monday. He received his notice on Tuesday. By the following week, he wore a Luftwaffe auxiliary uniform and stood on a Flak battery platform, learning to perform tasks that veterans had trained months to master. Over 200,000 teenagers eventually served. They received weeks of training for jobs that required months of practice. Many were assigned to operational batteries while still learning which end of the shell went into the breech first. Gerhard Tamm was born in 1931 in the Silesian town of Lauban. He was too young for the initial conscription wave. The program took boys born in 1926 and 1927, making him 4 years too young to die with them. But he watched. He watched older schoolmates, boys just 4 or 5 years his senior, boys he had played football with, boys whose voices had barely changed, disappear from their desks and reappear weeks later in uniforms too large for their frames. They spoke differently when they returned on leave. Something behind their eyes had changed. Contemporary photographs from Berlin in 1943 show boys born in 1927 crewing anti-aircraft searchlights. The images are not hidden. They sit in archives, available to anyone who looks. Study the faces. One photograph shows a boy who cannot be older than 16 operating a sound detection apparatus, massive acoustic horns designed to locate incoming aircraft by the noise of their engines. His face holds something between pride at the uniform and terror at what he knows is coming. The summer of 1943 demonstrated exactly what awaited these children. Operation Gomorrah began on July 24, 1943, when 791 RAF bombers crossed the North Sea toward Hamburg. It was the first of 4 major raids over 10 days, a concentrated campaign designed to burn one of Germany's largest cities to the ground. The Flak crews defending Hamburg were no longer the professionals of 1940. They were increasingly composed of teenage auxiliaries mixed with wounded veterans transferred from hospitals. Men reassigned because they could still load a shell even if they could no longer march 20 miles with a rifle. They manned their positions through an apocalypse that exceeded anything the war had yet produced. The first 3 raids were devastating, but the night of July 27th was something else entirely. Meteorological conditions that night created a perfect storm, literally. Hot, dry summer air combined with concentrated incendiary bombing to create a firestorm that consumed 8 square miles of the city in hours. The temperature at ground level reached 800 degrees Celsius. The fire generated its own weather system. Hurricane-force winds roared inward as the massive blaze sucked oxygen from surrounding neighborhoods. People were lifted off their feet and pulled into the flames. Those who sought shelter in basements suffocated as the fire consumed every particle of oxygen above them. An estimated 37,000 civilians died in a single night. Helga Sander was 19 years old, serving as a Flak-Helferin with a communications unit attached to one of Hamburg's flak batteries. Women like Sander were technically restricted to support functions, operating communications equipment, working searchlight controls, serving as messengers between command posts, rather than directly loading and firing the guns. The distinction provided legal cover for the Reich's claim that it did not send women into combat. The distinction meant nothing to the bombs falling on their positions. In her post-war testimony, Sander described watching the firestorm from her communications post on the periphery of the conflagration zone. She was close enough to see the glow illuminate the entire horizon, close enough to feel the heat on her face from kilometers away, close enough to watch the neighborhoods where she had grown up disappear into a wall of flame. She was far enough to survive. Her unit continued relaying targeting information to gun batteries, even as everything they had known turned to ash. The batteries kept firing. They kept firing because the raids continued. Hamburg was bombed before Gomorrah. Hamburg was bombed after Gomorrah. The crews who survived the firestorm remained at their posts for the next raid, and the raid after that, and every raid that followed until the war ended or they died, whichever came first. By 1944, the Allies had refined flak suppression from opportunistic strafing into systematic extermination. From late 1943 through early 1944, 9 Fighter Command developed techniques specifically designed to kill flak crews before and during bombing operations. This wasn't incidental. This wasn't pilots taking shots at targets of opportunity. These were planned missions with specific objectives. The objectives were simple: find the crews, kill them, clear the sky for the bombers that would follow. The tactical methodology evolved through brutal practice. American P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang pilots learned to identify active flak positions during bombing raids by watching for muzzle flashes and tracer rounds, batteries that revealed themselves by firing on the bomber formations above. Once identified, the positions were marked. Pilots would peel away from escort duty and dive on the positions from multiple angles. A P-47 carried 8.50 caliber machine guns. Each gun fired approximately 800 rounds per minute. A single 2-second burst put over 200 rounds into an area the size of a tennis court. The thin armor shields protecting flak crews could not stop 50 caliber rounds at close range. A single strafing pass could kill every exposed member of a gun crew in the time it takes to exhale. The British used Hawker Typhoons and Tempests, aircraft designed specifically for ground attack. Typhoons carried RP-3 rockets, 60-pound high-explosive warheads mounted on rails beneath the wings. A Typhoon pilot could salvo 8 rockets into a flak position from 1,000 meters out, then follow with cannon fire on the survivors. The rockets didn't need to score direct hits. They just needed to land close enough to shred the crews with shrapnel. Historical analysis confirms that flak was the primary killer of Typhoon pilots in 1944 to 1945. Attacking these positions was extraordinarily dangerous. The gun crews were not helpless. They were firing back, filling the air with shells designed to destroy aircraft. Pilots who came in low and slow to line up their shots died in large numbers. But the exchange rate favored the attackers. Always. A pilot who survived his run had killed 5, 8, 11 men. A crew that shot down a single fighter had stopped one aircraft while dozens more circled to make another pass. The mathematics were merciless. German railway flak crews had it worst of all. They sat on flat cars with light anti-aircraft weapons, 20mm and 37mm guns designed to ward off strafing attacks. The problem was physics. Their guns couldn't traverse fast enough to track fighters moving at 250 to 300 miles per hour. The mechanical rate of rotation simply could not match the angular velocity of an aircraft in a diving attack. They were visible for miles along the rail lines, their flat cars unmistakable to any pilot looking for targets. So they sat there, waiting, knowing the mathematics as well as anyone. The geography of German flak deployment created a certainty of death that no amount of training could overcome. Heavy flak batteries were concentrated around strategic targets, industrial facilities, transportation hubs, and above all, cities. The largest concentrations defended Berlin, Hamburg, Vienna, and the industrial regions of the Ruhr Valley. These were not mobile units that could fall back when positions became untenable. These were fixed installations. Massive concrete emplacements, permanent battery positions that could not be moved because they were built into the earth itself. The flak towers of Berlin, Hamburg, and Vienna represent the physical monuments to this static death sentence. The Berlin Zoo flak tower, the Zoo bunker, rose over 40 meters above the surrounding city, a brutalist concrete fortress designed to provide elevated firing positions for heavy anti-aircraft guns. 4 twin 128mm Zwilling guns sat on the roof platform, each capable of firing 20 rounds per minute to altitudes exceeding 14 kilometers. Lighter weapons, 20mm and 37mm guns studded the lower platforms, creating overlapping fields of fire designed to engage aircraft at every altitude. The tower itself was essentially invulnerable. Walls over 2 meters thick, reinforced concrete designed to withstand direct hits from heavy bombs. The crews inside the tower were protected from blast and shrapnel as long as they stayed inside. But the guns were on the roof. The guns required crews to stand exposed on open platforms while bombers passed overhead and fighters dove at them from every angle. The crews had to expose themselves to fight, so they died exposed. The interior of the tower was a different kind of hell. Ammunition hoists running continuously. The concussive pressure of the 128mm guns firing, each shot producing a shockwave that crew members described as a physical blow to the chest. Smoke from the guns mixing with dust shaken loose by near misses. The constant noise. A raid might last hours. The crews rotated, but the guns never stopped. The crews were supposed to sleep in bunks built into the lower levels. Nobody slept. Berlin faced 363 separate air raids during the war. Not a single concentrated campaign. An attritional nightmare spanning years. Günter Vogel had entered military cadet training at 12 years old in Potsdam, one of thousands of German boys whose childhood was consumed by military preparation. By 1944, he was 17, serving with a Flak battery in the Berlin defense zone. On the night of November 22, 1944, 272 RAF Lancaster bombers attacked Berlin in one of the war's largest single raids on the capital. Vogel's battery engaged the incoming bombers for over an hour. The 88mm guns fired continuously, the barrels growing so hot that the protective grease on the external surfaces began to smoke. Spent shell casings piled around the gun platforms. The loaders' arms cramped from the repetitive motion of feeding 20-pound shells into the breech. The noise was beyond description. The crash of the guns, the roar of aircraft engines, the whistle of falling bombs, the explosions walking across the city in the distance. A near miss killed 2 members of Vogel's crew that night. One was a boy from Vogel's former school. They had known each other for years. He was 17, same as Vogel. The other was a 40-year-old veteran who had been transferred from a hospital in Poland. He had lost 3 fingers on his left hand to frostbite during the winter of 1942-43. He could still load shells with his remaining fingers. He could not hold a rifle anymore, so they sent him to the Flak batteries. Both were replaced within 48 hours. Another teenager, another wounded veteran. The cycle continued. The raids continued. By winter 1944 to 1945, the Volkssturm conscription brought the final demographic wave. Men as old as 60 were pressed into military service, some assigned to home defense Flak positions in cities they had lived in their entire lives. A single Flak battery might now contain a 60-year-old veteran of the First World War who remembered the trenches of Verdun, a 17-year-old schoolboy who had never kissed a girl, a 35-year-old soldier missing fingers from frostbite who should have been convalescing in a hospital, and a young woman operating communications equipment because there was no one else left to do it. None of them had received adequate training for the situation they faced. All of them were forbidden to retreat. German forces in Normandy had been documented as containing older troops, the medically unfit, and men recovering from wounds. The Flak batteries defending the Reich were composed of the same human material: the dregs, the broken, the children. The Vienna Flak towers still stand today. Too massive to demolish economically, engineers have calculated that destroying them would cost more than the towers themselves are worth in real estate. So they remain, concrete monuments in a modern city. Tourists photograph them without understanding what happened on those platforms, without understanding that teenagers died there night after night, defending a city that would survive them. In April 1945, Soviet forces reached Berlin. A Flak division remained among the units defending the Berlin defense area during the final assault. Their guns had been designed to shoot down aircraft. Now they pointed at tanks and infantry advancing through rubble-strewn streets. The crews had survived years of bombing raids, only to face direct assault by ground forces who knew exactly where they were and exactly how to kill them. Hitler's final written orders forbade defensive units from retreating. The boys who had survived thousands of hours of bombing were ordered to die in place. Their positions were known. Their ammunition was dwindling. Their orders admitted no alternative. Günter Vogel survived the war. He would later publish a memoir describing his experiences, including that night of November 22nd, 1944, when two of his crewmates died beside him. Helga Sander also survived. Her post-war testimony preserved the memory of watching Hamburg burn. Some things cannot be spoken of in ordinary conversation. Some memories require testimony to hold them. 80% is a number that cannot be verified. The records that would confirm or deny it were burned in the same fires that killed the crews. What can be verified is worse than any statistic. Over 200,000 teenagers pulled from their schools. Cities bombed hundreds of times. Crews who couldn't retreat because orders forbade it, and their concrete emplacements couldn't move anyway. Children targeted by pilots flying specific missions designed to kill them before they could kill bombers. By war's end, German air defences included 30,463 light flak guns of 20mm and 37mm caliber, along with thousands of heavy weapons. All manned by personnel drawn from sources that would have been unthinkable in 1940. All dying in positions they could not abandon. If your father or grandfather encountered the 88 from either side of the gun, I'd like to hear that story in the comments. These are memories that won't survive much longer. The men who flew those missions and the men who crewed those guns are in their 90s now, if they're still alive at all. What they remember matters. Write it down before it's gone. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one.